So this morning we have Cheryl Ainoa with us, and she is the COO at D2L, where I work. She's based out of California, so she's traveled quite a ways to be with us here today. Having worked with Cheryl for a couple of years now, I knew that she had some really great perspectives on what it means to deliver a quality product. So I was really excited when she agreed to come and help us kick off this opening keynote presentation for day 2 of our conference. I think it's a really good talk to start the day with because the messages that she has to share this morning are a really great framework to kind of keep in mind as you afterwards go out and attend other talks and think about other aspects of quality. And I think it'll just be a great way to sort of set up your thought process for the rest of the day. So I'll let her come up and tell us more about what is quality. So thank you very much, Cheryl.
Okay, is that working? Yes? No? Yep. Testing, 1. No? I can talk real loud. It worked 10 minutes ago when we tested it, didn't it? Okay, testing, there we go. Okay. Now you're just playing with me. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I have to get started on KWS QA. Particular. About it. Do you want to use that instead of this?
No, it's just interfering.
Okay. Is really around what is quality is kind of a weird name. You're probably like, we're the SQA Association. Of course, we know what quality is. Why are you talking about this here? And really what, we couldn't figure out a better, shorter name for the talk, but it was really around the importance of understanding in your customer's eyes what is the definition of quality, because by definition, the customer's perception of quality is the reality of what quality is to them. And when I started early in my career, I always thought quality was the absence of defects. And what I've learned throughout is that in reality, quality is, again, from the customer's view, what is it that they're expecting and looking for. And it might be absent of defects, but still not a high quality product. And so the importance of understanding that and the impact it has on the role of SQA is what we're here to talk about today. So I think one of the easiest ways to understand how I think about it is to kind of go through a little bit my career journey. Have anybody of you done journey maps? Do you guys do journey maps as part of your stuff? Okay. This is something I stole as a best practice from Intuit. It's a good way to kind of tell your story and help people understand your journey a little bit to help them understand you and your thinking. I graduated with a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Washington State University back in 1988, 30 years ago. That is probably, some of you probably weren't even born then. But I've seen a lot in terms of software itself, the development of it, and how people interact with it in their lives. That's changed tremendously through the last 30 years. And how you develop a high quality product that is so integral to people's lives and what they do day to day has also evolved rapidly as technology itself has enabled that. My first job out of college was at a company called Varian Associates, which was at the time, and actually still is today, 30 years later, the world leader in creating radiation therapy equipment for the treatment of cancer. And this really set for me one of the two key pillars of my foundational beliefs in terms of what is quality in terms of product quality. When I started, we were just starting on a project to put a control system front end to the radiation therapy equipment. Before that, it was all manual setup and manual delivery. And this was the first time, it actually wasn't the first time in the industry, it was the second time in the industry. The first one had failed miserably. But it was the first time our company was putting a control system front end to this to enable the efficiency and the quality of the delivery of the radiation therapy itself. And as we started in this project, one of the things, you get a real appreciation for the importance of quality, because quite honestly, if there's a defect, you potentially kill people. And you can kill many people in a very painful way, okay? It's what we call the nuclear blast radius, right? If someone manually makes a mistake, it's generally gonna be on one treatment on one patient. Your blast radius is very small. But when you bake it into your software, and now software is delivering it, if you have a defect, the magnitude of the number of people and the number of treatments is tremendously higher. So we understood starting out that it was critical, defects were not an option, period. And at this time, again, this was back in the late 80s, before some of you were born, there weren't things like code coverage software. Selenium did not exist. There was no software quality tools out there. As a matter of fact, software quality wasn't actually, at the time, an occupation. There were no job descriptions out there for software quality. But as the product development team working on this product, we realized that the way we typically tested our machines, we'd bring in people who were domain experts. They were radiation therapy techs, and have them test the equipment and make sure that it worked. That was not going to be sufficient for what we were doing. And so a couple of us actually broke off to be the validators of the software itself. And I remember back in the days, the first pass of this, we literally printed out every line of code on pieces of paper and made a map, a code map across the entire building, because it took that, of every path of the software. And then we took highlighters, and we had our test cases that we would have manually written out with numbers. And we go with the highlighters and highlight by every line of code the exact test case that would be relevant to, and would go through and make sure that every line of code was covered, both positively and negatively, and every various permutation. And that was the only way to test the software, to make sure that 100% of it was actually covered by all our test cases. And then to make sure that the test cases themselves, but even there, in running the test cases, you're hoping nobody made a mistake in manually doing the test case itself. So we realized pretty quickly, human error is high. This is not a way to do this. Every time we change the code, we can't go back and reprint out hundreds of pages and repaper the entire building and take all the highlighters again. And so we realized very early, way before it became a thing, that QA as code was the only way that we were going to be able to scale this and make it work. And so we actually took some of our best software engineers, and they became our QA team, and they started writing code to test our code. And we wrote the first frameworks. We probably were one of the first code coverage. We probably had our own, probably were the first code coverage tool out there, was for internal use, because we had to know that 100% of every branch, every line was covered. And so this really reinforced for me the importance of QA as code is the only way to truly do scalable, high-velocity software development over time. It's becoming even more important as we've gotten to Agile and other things where the pace of release is that much faster. So that was my first foundational, learning about quality. My next job was at a company we broke off of Varian. It was 6 of us in a garage in Palo Alto, my first startup. And we couldn't get Varian to invest in a project that we thought was pretty compelling. And so we decided to do it ourselves. We were young and didn't know what we were getting into. And the premise of the product was this. At that point in time, radiation therapy, it was, again, all manual. And the premise of the product was we didn't want to allow the machine to be beamed on unless it was actually set up to deliver the right amount of dosage to the right position. And we wanted to prevent the machine from being beamed on if that was the case. Now that sounds pretty simple and pretty obvious, and you're probably like, really? They delivered radiation before you could do that? But they did. That was the state of the industry at that point in time. And so the premise there was, what I learned here was the importance of context. Software as code, or QA as code, is not enough. This is the first time it became clear to me the importance of the context in which the user is using your product is as important as being defect-free. And I'll have to give you a little bit of a primer in radiation therapy to explain to you why this is. So, if you have, say, a tumor in your lung, tumor anywhere, you see a radiation oncologist who's a doctor in this, and they decide it's going to take 5,000 rads. I'm going to prescribe 5,000 rads are required to kill this tumor or to shrink it to the appropriate size that it's not causing a problem anymore. The problem is you can't deliver 5,000 rads at a tumor in one shot, because not only will you kill that tumor, you'll kill everything else in your body along the way, right? So instead, what they do is they, break the dosage out over, usually at the time it was 25 to 30 treatments, and they would break it out into multiple angles of treatment. So generally anywhere from 4 to 12 different angles that you would deliver dosage into, such that any individual angle would receive 1/4, 1/10, 1/12 of the dosage, but the epicenter would receive 100% of the dosage. So if you had 4-port treatment, you'd get 1,250 rads for each of the 4, but the epicenter, that tumor, would get all 5,000 rads over the course of the treatment. What's important to understand about that is if you're getting these treatments 25, 30 days in a row, and you're getting, let's say, 4 treatments for each, then every day it's really important that the setup be exactly correct. Because if you don't have it exactly correct, if the beam's coming in here and the tumor's here, you're not delivering the full amount of beam, the full prescription, and you're delivering radiation to things you don't want to be delivering it to, right? So really important to make sure that the setup is exactly correct. The problem at that point in time was there was nothing that would, it was all manual, as I said. So radiation techs, the doctor would prescribe, a physicist would determine the right number of angles, 4 treatments, 8 treatments, whatever, over how many times. And then every day someone would come in and get treated, and a radiation tech would take the patient in, set them up for their first treatment, and there were between 12 and 15 parameters to get the equipment right to the right. The height of the couch, the angle of the couch, the angle of the machine, the angle of the jaws that would the radiation be delivered through. All these different parameters had to be set up for each and every one of those treatments. And so the therapist would go in with a piece of paper with the patient, all 15 parameters for each of the patient's 4, 6, 8, 12 treatments. They'd lay them out for the first one, they'd set up all these parameters, they'd go out, beam it on, they'd come back, set up the next 15 parameters, beam it on again. What do we know about manual processes? They're incredibly error prone. People are gonna make mistakes. The problem was, not only would people make mistakes, but there was no way the doctor, the physicist, would ever know it. They wouldn't know if the actual amount got there or not, because there was no way to actually capture was the setup right at the point in time that the radiation was delivered. So the premise of our product was you would set the patient up the first day, we'd capture the settings and the parameters in for each of the treatments, and every day after that, we wouldn't let you beam the machine on if it wasn't set up appropriately it wasn't within tolerance for each of those treatments. Sounds simple, right? I promise I'll get to the point of the story. So we worked with a number of radiation therapy centers, doctors who were really excited about this, really wanted this. And we wrote the software, used what we learned at the previous company to do software as code, had done a lot of the testing offline. And it got to the point where we now had to test with the actual machines, connect to the machines. And so we worked with a couple of our early customers to go in and work on weekends and overnight when they weren't treating patients to do the actual testing. And we got to the point where we were defect-free. We were so excited, we were ready to go. We went in for the first day, and I was there with the first set of rad techs that were going to run the system for their treatments. And I realized within about an hour, we had a quality problem. Basically, the techs were in revolt and were ready to shut the system off. And what was the problem? Well, the system was defect-free, but what we hadn't thought about and hadn't truly understood was the context in which they used the system. So again, radiation treatments, a patient comes in, they're going to have between 4 and up to 12 different setups per patient. Radiation therapy centers were, at the time, high-profit centers. They were scheduled in 15-minute treatments. And so they had to get patients in and out in 15 minutes. And the context of how this works is you do this in lead-filled rooms because it's radiation. And the door for radiation treatment centers is about 2 tons, 4,000 pounds. And it's very slow because obviously if you have a fast-moving door, you can, squish someone or squish lots of things. So the door takes 45 seconds to a minute to open and to close. So when we designed the software, the requirements were don't allow the machine to be beamed on if the parameters are not in the appropriate tolerance for that treatment, which meant at the time they'd hit beam on, the beam on button, we would run a check against the saved parameters, and if it was out of tolerance, we'd pop up a message and say, it's out of tolerance, you got to fix it. And then they do it, they come back, and presumably they hit beam on again, and we do it again. What we didn't realize was that the way radiation therapy centers and rooms were set up was that for a safety reason, the beam on button would not come on unless the door was fully closed. Okay, so think about this. They go in, they set up the patient, they come out, they shut the door, 45 seconds to a minute. Now the beam on button's on. Now they click the beam on button and it comes up and says, oops, sorry, this setup is out of tolerance. They have to go open the door again, another 45 seconds to a minute, go in, tweak the one tolerant, come back out, shut the door again, another 45 seconds to a minute. They've got 15 minutes to get this patient through, and they've now just wasted 2 minutes of time that they probably didn't have. And by the way, in the first 6 patients they treated, every patient, at least 50% of the treatments had an error. So all of a sudden, we were blowing their schedule out the door, and they were having to go do this: open the door and close the door, and open the door and close the door. Now, my first thinking was, holy cow! I'm glad I've not had any radiation treatment because clearly manual error is very high here. The fact that they have all these errors all the time, but it's a fact of human error. Humans make mistakes about 10% of the time. They've proven that over and over, so it's not surprising. What was really concerning was their answer was, well, we just have to shut it off because we can't get our patients treated. And what that made me realize was the context. There was a very easy fix, by the way, which was we created another button that let them come out and validate the setup against the parameters without having to be ready to beam on. So you could go set up the patient, come out, say, test parameters, tell me if I'm wrong or not, while the door is still open. But if you didn't understand that door and the importance of how impactful that door was to them to do their jobs, the whole system we set up, the whole software design itself, was from their perspective not good quality because they couldn't use it to get done what they needed to get done. And this was, we were lucky there was a simple solution there, but this was a really key learning for us because we had all been QA as code, it's defect-free, we're good to go, and yet we had an unusable product, okay? So fast forward a couple years, and I switched over into consumer software, and I found that a lot of these lessons actually learned both QA as code and context matters as much as code with respect to the quality of a product. And I think the biggest reinforcement of this for me, I know there's some Google people in the audience. I'll use my Google example. So I was at Yahoo for 8 years, and I tell people it was 6 of the best of my career. The last 2 were tough. I was there for the heyday, and I was there for a lot of the ride down. But the part I was in, I ran all the product development for all the media products, which are probably the ones you're familiar with: news, sports, finance, TV, music, etc. And at the time when I first started, I think it was back in 2004, Google had just gone public. They were starting to now actually become a competitive threat as opposed to a collaborator of ours. And we found out we had just reached #1 for Yahoo Finance. We had just taken that to being a very successful product, leading in the industry in terms of what people used for their investment information. And we found out that Google was planning to try and go in and compete with us because they hired one of our product managers. That was how we found out. And we were panicked, honestly. It was like, oh my God, this was the first competitive threat we had. And they were going to go in and use their experts in using data and analytics, et cetera, to create the best experience, because that worked for them with search, so they were going to apply that to finance. And we were pretty worried. We spent a lot of time on how do we make sure we have the best experience possible. And I will say to this day, I credit Google never was able to even break into the finance market. They never got a foothold. Turned out to be a completely not worrisome threat, but only because I think of the actions of one of our lead QA person at the time, who we were working on understanding the experience. We knew that the key to winning was to have the best experience for our users. And our QA lead came to me and said, hey, I want to make sure that I'm putting out how do I make sure that we're putting out the best quality product? And learning from my lessons, I said, make sure you really understand the context in which people are using our site. And so they went, and we knew at the time, we had a theory that there were two different types of users. One was the technical investor that would come, they're using the information to do active trading or active investment to make investment purchase decisions or selling decisions. The second was what we call the personal investor. And that was someone who's, I want to understand how to save for retirement. I want to figure out how to save for my kids' college education. Very different modes of operation. And so she decided she was going to go look at the technical investing. And we knew that we had some of these users within Yahoo itself, because our finance department probably was the people who sent us more feature requests than anybody else of our customers, the multi-millions of customers we had out there. I think our finance department had more personal requests in. And so she went to our controller at the time and said, hey, I'd like to understand, can I observe how you use Yahoo Finance when you're using it? And the pivotal response that he had at that point in time was he looked at her and said, well, do you mean during trading hours? Or do you mean on the weekends? And she was like, well, what do you mean? What's different about that? And what we found out was there weren't two different users. There were two different usage modes. But many times it was the same user. The difference was, while the market was open, 95% of the people who were interacting with Yahoo Finance were doing it to make active market decisions. And their mode, any of you heard of Guy Kawasaki? Any of you guys read Guy Kawasaki? Okay. One of the original internet gurus. He's done a lot of great writing on, in the early days of the project. And he talks a lot about lean in versus lean out interaction modes. And what he means by that is lean in is something where you're specifically focused on coming to conclusion or achieving a specific outcome in that moment that you're interacting. And technical investing is very much a lean in. I want to find out, should I be selling this stock right now? I want to know, should I be selling or purchasing, selling, what should I be doing? Personal investing is very much a lean out. It's, I want to browse and find out what are the ways that I might save for retirement. I want to see what trusted advisors do. I want to see what different variety of people do. Very different interaction modes. And therefore, my definition of quality of experience is very different in those modes. And this is what this QA tester or QA lead found at the time. When he was interacting with the site for technical investing, it was all about speed. And by the way, it was all about speed of the quote itself. All the rest of it was ancillary. Nice, but not necessary. So don't make me wait 3 seconds to give me a page response. Give me the quote instantly, and you can fill in the concept of lazy loading. We were doing way before that ever even had a name. You fill in all the other stuff afterwards. I don't care. It can take you 10 seconds to load the rest of the page. But boy, that stock quote better be instantaneous. Very different than on the weekend when he's doing a search on ways to retire, ways to do stuff for retirement. That, I'm looking for breadth. I'm looking for federated. I'm looking for things, trusted sources that I care about. I might be willing to wait for the experience to come up because I'm looking for a richer experience. So my definition of quality of interaction and the way I interact is very different. And we took those learnings and applied them to the test case strategy, how we developed, how we tested the product over time. And it fundamentally, I believe, is what made the difference when you looked at the reviews at the time of why people used Yahoo Finance and why they didn't use Google after they tested it. Everybody would go try it out because it was Google. But most people, like 93% of the people, never stayed there. They always came back to Yahoo. And it was because the quality of the experience, that was the actual words people would use. And it was because we understood the mode in which they were interacting, and we made sure the experience really matched that for where they were at and what they were trying to do at that point in time. And I think that was the difference in why we succeeded and continued to have that successful product. Now, after Yahoo, I went to Intuit, spent about 4.5 years there. I think the most important lesson that I learned there was the importance of QA in influencing the right decisions on the organization. At Intuit, Intuit for many years had been very focused. You guys probably all know TurboTax and QuickBooks so for many years, they had a very powerful user experience organization. And they really invested in understanding the user experience up front. Very smart, best practices. Understand that up front before you design the product. And that was awesome. And then the developers would go develop the product, and then a lot of times this was a very waterfall model at the time. QA would go test the product. And what would happen is when QA would find bugs, they weren't at the time as involved up front with the user experience. And so how they would describe and prioritize bugs was based on the standard definitions of bug priority. Sev 1, can't complete an action. Sev 2, I'm not going to go through all of them, but like Sev 4 was text, wrong text, right? Because Sev 4, if it's wrong text, you can still complete an action, who cares? Except when you're doing your taxes, some wrong text can be pretty problematic. So the strict definitions weren't always the right way to prioritize. And QA understanding the user experience and which pieces mattered and which didn't, and writing up the defects in a way that people understood the impact to the user was mission critical in terms of us making the right decisions. Again, when you're writing software that tens of millions of people are using, the bug volume that comes in, or the impacts that come in, can be overwhelming. How do you quickly identify what really matters and what matters? It's what matters to the customers, right? So how do you identify what things are most likely going to be impact to the customer, and how do you make sure you're making the right decisions as to which to focus on first? And it really comes down to everybody understanding what is most impactful, negatively or positively, to the customer. So who's the person who's best able to understand and define that? The person who's doing the testing. And if they don't describe the impact back in terms of the customer themselves, the chances are other people are not going to understand and interpret that, and they won't be making the right decisions for priorities. So we ended up spending a lot of time. We found out the hard way. We were losing market share at the time when I first started to H&R Block because of the quality of our product. And it wasn't that we didn't have good testing, and it wasn't that we didn't know that bugs exist, and it wasn't even the pace at which we were able to fix bugs. It's that we were fixing the wrong bugs first, because we didn't understand the impact to the users. And it's because our QA people were really awesome QA people, but they were describing it in very specific QA terms. They weren't describing the impacts of the defects with respect to the impact to the customer. So we shifted that around, and if you go look today, unfortunately, I sold all my Intuit stock, but it's at record highs, like $212. I think when I left, it was at $110. But a lot of that is because if you read why they're getting record number of usage and market share, it's because of the quality of their products. And I believe a lot of that is because we fundamentally shifted the definition of quality from the old school, here's the hard-coded definitions of severity, to really the definition of what is the impact to the customer. And sometimes that wrong text is more important than not being able to complete an action of some sort, right? So that was a key learning for me at Intuit. Now I'm at D2L, been here about 2.5 years, and getting to apply a lot of the things that have come up through, again, importance of QA as code, the importance of understanding the context of the customer, and the importance of influencing the right decisions through always describing impacts to the customer of the particular thing you're advocating. Those are kind of the three things that, as we look to transforming the way the world learns, we've really started to apply, and I think a lot of what I've brought into the table as we've looked at D2L. A simple example, when I started, historically D2L has been higher ed, and in the last number of years moved into K-12 and now starting to move into corporate. And while an instructor sounds the same for K-12 and higher ed, think about the day-to-day experience, very different. A K through 12 teacher, my next door neighbor is a second grade teacher. She has effectively 5 periods a day, 5 minutes between each, 30 kids in the class. Her life is interrupt driven. The amount of time she has to put on anything is very short periods, separated by periods of time in the class. My cousin is a university professor at George Mason University in DC. It is a really busy day. I have a hard time keeping a straight face when she explains to me how busy she is because she has to teach 2 courses that quarter on Tuesday and Thursday. Because the life of a university professor is much more focused on writing and research and things like that. And they have much more time to lean in and lean out. Whereas K through 12 teacher, much more lean in. That's all they've got. It's all about time to action. It's around getting things done. So for us, as we think about how do we understand, do we have a high quality product for the persona, the user that we have to understand who the users are and the differences in them. And we have to understand what is their experience, and therefore what is the definition of a quality product from their perspective. So that's what we're doing at D2L. Now, this isn't just Cheryl's opinion. If you go Google definition of quality, you'll find as many opinions out there as anything. But what you'll find in a lot of them, I just went and looked recently, probably about 90% of them always come back to meeting or exceeding customer expectations. It is very rare that you'll find them that say absence of defects. Absence of defects is one part, but it is not, in most people's minds, the definition of a quality product. And so this is the top 10 from the ASQ. This was from a survey or study in 2013. I think it's still relevant today. I think my favorite is number 1, services or products that meet or exceed customer expectations. Although I also really enjoy, oops, we missed one. This was one of my favorite. Ensuring customers come back and products do not. I like that mantra. So that's great, Cheryl. So how do we do that? How do we make sure we understand? Because there could be many personas out there, there could be many things. Now, those of you who know me know I can't give a presentation without having a reference to Star Trek. It's just, and I did find a very relevant way, I think, to work this in this time. The Borg had it all figured out, right? From a customer empathy standpoint, if you want to really understand your customer, you go assimilate them. And you instantly know all their experiences and everything they have for all the people on your team. That's awesome. Unfortunately, we're not there yet. I wish we were. That would make life a lot easier. But how do you have the context of assimilating your customers, understanding the users, and understanding what the limitations, the things that they're working in day to day? So there's a bunch of different things that I'll share with you, and I'm interested if any of you have other ideas in the room or things you've tried. There's a lot of industry best practices out there, some that I learned early on. Something that sounds kind of creepy today, it was a standard terminology about a decade ago, was follow me homes. Any of you heard of follow me homes? It's a concept that IDEO put out probably more like 15 years ago. And the concept is you go observe people in their environment using your product. You don't just ask them how they use your product. You go observe them in their environment. And I would premise it's as important, if not more important, for QA to do this in figuring out the best ways to understand how to really test your product to ensure you're delivering high quality. If you don't understand what the customer's expectations are, and you're not going to understand the customer's expectations if you don't observe them in their environment and how they're using you. Now, this doesn't mean, honestly, at Yahoo, we actually did go approach people and ask if we could observe them in their homes, and they let us. Isn't that weird? Like today, you'd never do that. But there were many times where we would set up and go observe people in their homes using Yahoo Finance, using fantasy sports, all sorts of things. And they loved it, and we loved it. We'd learn a lot of things about how people interacted. What are the other things? Are they interrupt driven? Are they lean in? Are they lean out? How are they doing those things? So that may not be an option for you. It may be an option. If your customer is an internal customer, we have some engineers at D2L whose internal customers are NOC. And they can go sit and observe the NOC engineers any day. And when they've done that, they've learned tremendous amounts. I was talking to one engineer a couple months ago, and he's like, oh my God, I had no idea. I went and observed, and I realized a lot of things that to me were low priority defects were actually like the biggest pain points that these people were dealing with day to day. And in like an hour, I could save them hours and hours and hours of time every day and every week. And so that customer empathy, that observing the customer in their environment and how they interact, what other things impacting you as they're using the product is really important. And if you have the opportunity and figure out how you can actually observe them, we'd go to Starbucks. When I was at Intuit, they still probably do this. We'd go to Starbucks and sit and accost people as they were sitting down drinking their coffee. Hey, have you done your taxes yet? Would you mind taking a look at something and give me an insight? And most people normally would. We didn't even have to buy them coffee. We would, but they didn't ask for it. So there's easy ways, if you think about it, to observe your customer. For us at D2L, we had a bunch of people call up their kids' teachers and ask, it was the summer when I first started, can we come in and observe you in your classroom? Can we take a look at your classroom? Can you describe to us a day in the life? Can you show us how you interact with your students? They were all happy to do that. We got some key learnings out of that. It wasn't hard. It was just figuring out who are those customers and how do we get with them. So I would encourage the follow me homes. They're very important. If you have a UX department, ask if you can observe the testing, the user testing. Really critical. Ask if you can observe the recordings of it. Ask if you can actually deliver some of it. We a lot of times at other companies I've been at, we've had teams, the teams themselves, the sprint teams, go do the user testing. We train them. Any of you heard of the Eric Ries, the Lean Start-In stuff? Have you guys heard that? Okay. So the premise there is the team itself should actually do very rapid, quick tests of the theories, and you go find potential customers and put things in front of them and observe what works and what doesn't work. That's all really important to understanding how the customer interacts with your product. And if you don't understand what they're trying to accomplish and what matters to them, it's going to be hard to deliver a high quality experience. Empathy leads to quality. Again, it all goes back to the definition of quality is what the customer says quality is. You might think you have a defect-free product, but if at the end of the day the customer doesn't feel like it's a high quality product, it isn't. I would push all of you as QA professionals to take it a step further. It's not just you deliver and think about customer empathy in how you're designing your test strategies. But I think you have a really important role to helping your organization or your company overall become really focused on customer empathy. Because again, you guys more than anybody else are at the point of, there's a problem here. Let me explain to you from a customer view, from a user view, what this means to them. When you go observe your customers, bring others with you. Bring the development team with you. Bring the product manager with you. Share with them what you, in you doing the testing yourself, experience as frustration. Have them sit down and do it. Don't just use words. Literally put them in the environment themselves. There is nothing more impactful to helping someone understand the impact of something than having them sit down and do it themselves. You can talk till you're blue in the face, but when they sit down and actually try to do it themselves in that context, it's amazing. And really, the most important thing, always explain what it means from the user's point of view. Always, always, always. Don't go say, this doesn't work. That doesn't help me understand, why does it matter? Do I care? Always explain, from the user's point of view, this is what it means to them. They won't be able to complete this action. They won't be able to do this thing that's very important to them. Or they won't be able to complete this, but it won't matter because there's easier ways to get around it. But it's got to be from the user standpoint, because if you go talk to a variety of different roles, if you talk to your product manager, if you talk to your user experience person, if you talk to your engineer, if you put it in the context that everybody cares about, what does it mean to your user in being able to use your product, that gives you a grounding for everybody to be on the same page in terms of making prioritization decisions. Okay? And at the end of the day, that's how you deliver phenomenal experiences. Because phenomenal experiences are, by definition, high-quality experiences. It's defined by the customer themselves. And that's kind of all I have. So does that kind of make sense? Is there any questions? Do you guys have any questions, thoughts, ideas? Who here has a really good idea on how to deliver or develop customer empathy or understand their customer better? Who here has tried something other than Follow Me Homes? And yeah.
We had a lot of success involving our customer support reps directly in all of our software development, inviting them to the design meetings, having them participate in design reviews, testing, everything, and listening to them because they're in direct contact.
Can you guys all hear that? I'm sorry, Lisa? Lisa said they have a lot of success, including customer support in their design process from start to finish. That's a great way, because who talks to your customers the most support? Actually, it's a great best practice. I'm glad you brought that up. Reminds me, one of the companies I was at before Yahoo, and it's something I want to put in place at D2L, and we haven't yet, is every new employee in their first month had to spend half a day in support, shadowing a support rep, and every employee had to spend at least 2 hours a quarter shadowing support. Either at that point in time, it was listening to phone calls, and these days it'd be chat or email or whatever else. But really valuable way of not only bringing support in, but also you yourself understanding what are the pain points your customers have. I would also say if you have an active community today, like user community, spending time in the user community is a really good way to see the types of things your customers are talking about, what they're challenged with, and how they're doing things. Other ideas? Anybody else have thoughts on ways that or where you've seen that difference in customer empathy having a difference? Yeah.
I can tell you one bad case.
Yeah, please. We learn more from the bad cases than the good cases, don't we?
I was consulting at a hospital.
Yeah.
Doing a big tech transformation, and I was looking for typical sort of issues with clinical systems.
Mm-hmm.
And the data steward I was interviewing started out by saying, at the inquest I testified at.
Oh, at the inquest I testified at. Okay.
The problem, it was a medication error.
Yeah.
The practitioner was using, there was a difference between the information on the screen and the information in a printed report. It was exactly the same data, it was presented differently.
Yeah.
Now, most of us would say, that's a step forward, it's cosmetic, blah, blah.
Yep.
The practitioner was used to one and using the other.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, so did you guys all hear that? She was talking about what typically we define as a step 4, because information was just being presented in two different ways. But if a user was used to it in one way and using one as their frame of reference, but using the wrong one, they might actually be giving the wrong medicine or the wrong dosage. And in this case, it was actually the result of a problem that ended up in someone having to testify in something gone wrong. So again, it goes back to that understanding what is the experience the customer is in, the user's in, and then how do you design that into your test strategy so that you're ensuring that the way your product is going to be used is actually in the right context for how the customer will be experiencing it. Okay, well that's all I have. Thank you guys very much for indulging me today, and have a wonderful conference, and carry on.